Hello and welcome back to my painting channel. And first things first, I'd just like to take a moment to say thank you so much to everyone who's shown me so much support and so much love on this channel over the last year or so. Now, I made this channel as just a little bit of fun, as something to do in lockdown and a way of showing my friends just sort of what I do as a hobby. And since then, some of you guys have really helped to grow the channel and have supported me and commented and given me some really nice feedback. So I just wanted to say thank you so much, because without all of those sorts of cool little interactions, I wouldn't get anywhere near as much as an enjoyment out of building and painting on the channel as I do. So thank you guys, because it means a great deal. So on this channel, painting on this painting table, on this today, we are going to paint a walker, but we're going to paint a hunter walker. So this walker is going to be a guy that has been out in the wilds hunting before he had become a zombie himself. So this is for the Walking Dead All Out War game, and I'm starting by painting this guy with a really bright pink skin tone. So we're going to go for pink skin tones on this one, but we're also going to paint his outfit in a camouflage style paint job as well, so he should have quite a little bit of a cool sort of camo type effect across his clothing. So we've started with our nice rosy pink base color on the skin, and now I'm just using a army painter red tone, and this is just going to tone all of those areas and just hit in those sit in those recess points. So we're just going to get a little bit of color and a little bit of depth to that skin now, and then we'll build the skin back up and we'll get some highlights going once this is dry. Just be careful to not let the wash pool too much in certain areas, because you don't want it to be too red and too extreme in some parts. But with this particular model, as you can see, there's loads and loads of areas around his chest, and how sort of like how bumpy his stomach and his arms are. So we're going to have some fun sort of building that colour back up. So once the shade is dried in all of those areas, you can see now where we need to highlight. So what I'm doing is I'm going back to the original flesh tone, so back to that rosy flesh, and I'm just picking out with a nice thin down colour. I'm just picking out the raised areas of the skin. So where you can see across the chest and things like that, I'm just trying to follow along with those lines so that we get that nice bright colour on top while leaving the shade in the recessed areas. So following along with the arms and the skin down his arms, we're going to do the same thing. So we're just going to follow along the lines, trying our best to leave as much of that red sitting in between the shades as possible, in the recesses as possible. And the same with the hands. Once we come across, we're going to cover most of the hand, but just trying to leave in between the gaps between the fingers. This is where you can kind of get creative and build up sort of you can build up a lot of fleshy tones, so you can leave a few lines and things like that. As you'll see here, I'm trying to leave lines and things so that it creates a little bit more of a dynamic feel to the model, so that he's not just like one flat colour. And a model like this, where there's so much detail and so many like sort of grooves and things like that for the recesses, it actually does show off a lot more detail in the miniature. And once you paint this skin up, as much as it will take a little bit of time to go across and do it all, it's going to look amazing when it's done, because it's got so much detail to get to that stage. So once we get to that stage, it's going to be really rewarding, it's going to look awesome, and once he's on the table as well, he's going to be one of those models that will be one of the favourite models that you painted, because every time you see it, you'll see how much time and effort you put into it. So yeah, just sped this up a little bit just so that you can see a little bit of the paint work and the brush work, and how much I tend to paint in like small patches. So we just trying to pick those raised bits and trying to just follow along those lines like I was saying earlier. So as you see just across the face here, and we're trying to build these up in small, slow stages. So you don't want to go too extreme, because if you put too much of an extreme colour on top, then you might find that you're going to lose out on some more of the detail and things like that, which is what we don't want to do. So once we've done the rosy flesh, then we're moving on to the pale pink, and I'm doing the same thing as what I did originally with the rosy flesh. And we're just going back across some of the highlighted and some of the raised areas, just so that we're trying to see where the light would catch and things like that. And what this is now a nice highlight to the original skin colour and the original colours that we were using. So when I was saying earlier about following down the lines of the arms, and you can leave certain gaps and things like that to create a bit more folds and depth, that's kind of what I'm going to do here. So I'm not going to paint the entire area in this colour. We're just going to try to leave little lines and little gaps and things, so that it creates a bit more character, a bit more folds and things like that. As I was saying before about trying to leave as much, as I was saying before about thinning your paints down, so I use a flow improver for this. I know you can use water and things like that as well, but by thinning your paints, what happens is when they dry, you don't end up with too much of an extreme tone on your miniature. So what you end up doing is, by using a thin down paint going on top with this, it creates a smoother transition to your highlight, because it shows off a little bit of the colour underneath as well. And so what you get is a really nice blend between the shaded areas, the mid-tones that we've done, and now the highlights as well. So if you didn't thin your paints and you used your paints quite thickly on top by doing this, then that transition between those colours would be would end up being a bit too extreme, so it wouldn't be as pleasing on the eye and it wouldn't look as subtle. So what we're trying to do is just build those subtle tones and those subtle colours up. Now that I've done that and we've painted those stages, what I'm going to do is I'm just using a little bit of the red tone once more, but this time I'm using it a little bit watered down. So I'm just adding a little bit of water to create more of a glaze than a wash. And the reason for this is because if I've missed anything, or if I painted a little bit too much in one area, what this will do, this will only sit in the most recessed areas. So this is just tying those colours back together a little bit. So it's just a subtle sort of colour going on, rather than the extreme that we used originally. So from there, we're going to try and paint the camouflage now. So with this guy being a hunter, what we're going to do is we're just going to start off with the base colour. And the base colour of all of his gear, we're going to start with a green. So for this I'm using a Vallejo US Olive Drab. And this is a really good sort of colour. This is a really good green base colour as well. And a lot of the model range from Vallejo in this, they actually dry down to a really nice matte effect as well. So this will give us a really good base for us to build that camouflage up on top. And what you want to do is just be careful and just try to paint across all of the clothing, but while doing so you want to try and be careful not to hit the skin now, because we've spent all that time and effort painting the skin and getting it to look really nice with these little subtle transitions and highlights and things. The last thing we want now is to put green onto those bits of the skin that we've worked so hard on. The good thing with this as well is the green that we're using, because we're putting that against something like a pink and a red with this skin, it will allow the skin tones to really stand off the green as well, because these colours aren't normally sort of colours that are associated with going well together, green and red and all things like that. It creates a really good sort of contrast between those colours that will show those parts off individually quite well. For his hair, I'm just giving him sort of like a light brown, sort of scraggy look, so we're just going to use a beastie brown on this. And again, just trying to be careful not to get the brown on the green that we've painted now, and things like that. So you just want to try to be careful. Now, the reason why I've used a beastie brown for this is because when we're doing the camouflage, obviously we're going to use a few different colours for the camouflage. We don't want to use the same colour on the camouflage as we have on the hair, so that it doesn't blend in. We want to keep the hair a separate colour. And that way then the hair will stand out from the camouflage as well. So for the camouflage I'm going to use about 4 different paints, and pretty much what I'm going to do is I'm just going to stipple the camouflage on with the tip of the brush like so. And to begin with, we're using a khaki. This is a Vallejo khaki. It's a great sort of khaki colour. It works very similar to the Zandri Dust from Games Workshop from Citadel. And as you see, I'm just stippling this on with the very tip of the brush. And the reason for that is camouflage patterns tend to be quite random and quite sporadic. They tend to go all over the place. So because of the size of the miniature, you don't want to just put a big blob of colour onto your miniature and then try to have to work it out. So what we're going to do is we're just going to paint these like stippling effects across the base colour. And I'm going to cover the whole miniature in these sorts of stippled blobs of different colours. And what we'll do is, as we build these up, we'll eventually then, with the other colours, sort of create a really unique individual sort of pattern. And the cool thing with this is, it doesn't matter how many times you do it, every time you put this kind of camouflage on your miniature, it will be and it will look different, because every time you do it, you're just randomly stippling, so every miniature will be different. So if you're painting like sort of a band of military guys, they will all look completely different, but all have the same uniformed kind of idea, which is great, you know. I mean, if you want to paint sort of like a war band or something like that, like a kill team or something, and you want to use a camouflage pattern, you can do so, and it makes your miniatures look a little bit more individual, but also keeping them together as the same unit, so that would be great. So once we've done the khaki, I'm going to do the same thing while we stipple, like I say, just using the very tip of the brush. But this time I'm using a very dark brown, so we're going with a Vallejo dark rust here, which is very similar to the Citadel's Dryad bark, so we're just using a very, very dark sort of dark brown here. And what I'm going to do with this one is just going to almost trace a little bit around the edges of where the khaki is. So what I'm kind of doing now is, as you can see, I'm filling in again by stippling around the edges of that khaki. So you've got the khaki, which is the lighter stage, and then this, which is the darker stage. And as you can see, that random pattern now is starting to take a little bit of shape already. So what we're doing is we're just following around where the khaki is and just building up around some of those edges. Now what you don't want to do is just trace around the whole pattern. What we want to try and do is just trace around one side. So just pick one side, doesn't matter which side, if you want to go across the top of it, the left of it, and just trace that around and then connect bits together so that you're kind of creating this, well, like this sort of pattern, as you like. And then we're going to do the same thing again, but with a lighter brown. So for this I'm using a mahogany brown. This one is kind of like a Tuskegee fir from Citadel. And this is a lighter brown now, so again, because this is more of like a reddish brown, it is also different to the brown that we've used on the hair. So again, his hair isn't going to blend into the miniature. Instead, this is going to create a little bit more of a colour difference and things like that. So we are now going to again trace around the edges and trace around those colours, and you're just going to build up by tracing around the outside of those darker colours now, as you see. And again, you can see we're starting to build up that great looking sort of camouflage now. And it seems like it takes a long time, and it doesn't actually take that long, and it's not actually that difficult a thing to build or to paint. And the more you sort of paint and practice this, the better you get at doing it as well. So yeah, just practice on some of your miniatures. Try this sort of stippling with the edge of your brush, and try to just trace around the areas where some of those colours would be, in random sort of random little patterns and things like that. By doing it this way, you should be able to tie those colours together, see? So that khaki then ties into the dark rust, which ties into the mahogany brown, because they're all connecting to each other, but at the same time, they're all apart from each other. Just going to go back and wait for that. I almost used all of way too much colour on my brush there. So as you see, just tracing, still using that stippling technique, still going around the edge, as you can see. Just building up that colour, and this is great now because we've got the green, which is the base tone, the khaki, which is like the really light, we've got the really dark, then we've got another sort of brown, and that's great because this is giving us a real extreme sort of difference in colours as well. So for the final colour, what I'm going to use is a goblin green. Goblin green from Vallejo is very similar to a moot green from Citadel, and this is the final bit. So because this is the final one, what I'm going to try and do is I'm not going to try and put this too much or too extreme because this is a really bright colour. So what I'm doing is I'm just going to try to put this into little areas and in small bits of the pattern as well. Still sticking with the same stippling effect, still sticking with the same kind of dabbing and tracing around the area where some of those colours are, just so that we can tie colours together. But as you see now, I'm using smaller patterns, so I'm just trying to place this in smaller areas. Just like so, so just tracing in between. You can go over different layers as well with the camouflage. That's what makes painting camouflage so unique and so rewarding, is it doesn't matter if you go over a previous layer when you're stippling along, because having them blend between each other actually adds to the effect. So don't be afraid to paint sort of when you're painting your brown, don't be afraid to go over bits of the khaki or over bits of the green and things like that, because it will tie into the fact that that camouflage is blending into each other. So there you go, that's the camouflage pretty much done now, and we're going to keep that camouflage as it is for now. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to go in and do the belt. So using that dark rust that I used, that very, very sort of dark brown colour, just going to paint the base colour on the belt for that. And normally for this I also paint the shoes as well. I find this dark rust, this very dark brown, to be a really, really good base colour for when you want to paint things like leather or skin tones and things like that. This is such a dark brown that it gives you a lot of freedom when you paint in different colours on top. So if you paint sort of like a reddy brown back on top, or a leather brown, a more orangey colour back on top, this is a really good sort of base colour to start those sorts of colours. So just using a very, very small bit of silver, so plate main metal this time for the army painter. Just going to pick out the belt buckle. This is very, very fiddly. Don't be afraid, don't be worried if you make a slight mistake, because you can fix that going back to that dark rust as well. So don't be too worried that you've got to get this exact and precise in the first instant, because it is a very, very fiddly little job just getting that little belt buckle done. There we go, just take your time. So from there, what I'm going to do, I'm just going to cover the whole part of the clothing, so all of the camouflage that we've painted, in a Army Painter strong tone wash. Strong tone is a good one because this is brown. This is very much like an Agrax earth shade, I guess, because it's a very dark brown shade. It sits well in the recesses, and it ties all those colours together. Now what we're going to do with this one, normally if I was painting sort of a miniature that was not a zombie, I would build the colours back up afterwards, but for this one, because we want this zombie to look a bit rough and ready and a little bit dark and a little bit dingy as if he's been out in the wild for a while, I'm actually not going to brighten the colours of his camouflage up. I'm going to keep them toned down and dark. I'm going to keep them quite dingy, because this guy is quite, well, he's a zombie, he's been out in the wild, you know, this guy's going to be dirty, he's going to be rough and ready, so we don't want him to look too bright and lovely, not from the clothing aspect anyway. Just going back to the original Beastie Brown, from the hair, just add in a very, very, very gentle dry brush across, just to get that colour to pop a little bit. Now this is always an optional layer. I do this with a lot of different models and a lot of different miniatures. You can use weathering effects, and you can use weathering powders and things like that to do this. For this I tend to use typhus corrosion as well, and typhus corrosion is great because this is a technical paint. It's dark, it dries down very dark, but it also has little textured like bits of sand or grit inside as well. And so what that does is it adds to the grime and the dirt and the sort of muddiness and messiness of the miniature, which is great. So I normally do this kind of just from the knee down on the legs, and I normally, as you can see, just stipple little bits of this on, and the same then just across the bottom part of the coat or the clothing, because obviously the clothing and things, the dirt and dust and things would gather just across the bottom. And again, with another technical layer, if you want, you can add blood to it. So using Citadel's blood for the blood god, this is brilliant for just adding across the arm where he's kind of missing his arm and he's lost his arm, and that's all hanging off and horrible as well. Now with that blood for the blood god, not only can you stipple it in large quantities around the area and place that down and across that big sort of arm that he's missing, you can also place it in sort of some of the smaller patches. And what I tend to do is, using a thin brush, just drag one or two small strips, one or two small sort of like brush strokes down the miniature as well, to make it look like the blood is dripping down out of those cuts and out of those wounds as well. And it's also good to just add a little bit around the mouth and things like that as well. I mean, these zombies are hungry, they like to eat a bit of flesh, they're going to get blood around their mouths and things like that, you know. They're not going to be too fancy and too pretty. They're going to be quite gnarly and quite nasty, you know, and covered in blood and all things like that. Well, now that he's based and he's all painted, this is how he looks, and he's all finished. I love the contrast of the bright reds onto that camouflage and the greens and things. You could build those colours back up if you want, but like I said, I'm keeping this guy really rough and ready and dirty. And that's our camouflaged hunting zombie. So this is, as I say, from The Walking Dead All Out War, and yeah, I hope that you guys take something from this. I hope that this helps you painting, and I really do hope that you enjoyed this little video. Here's a small clip of all of my Walking Dead guys with some of the projects you guys mixed in as well. So yeah, as always, thank you very, very much for watching. I hope that you enjoyed this video. I hope that the camo technique is something that you can use to build up some of your own miniatures. So thank you as always, guys, and take care.